Hello and welcome to this special broadcast. I'm Zakka Jacob. Now, throughout this terrible time over the last year or so, all of us have looked for reassuring voices, voices of eminently qualified doctors, people who know what they're talking about, to guide us through the turbulence of COVID-19. One of the most respected and reliable voices in the world of infectious diseases is that of Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's the head of the US National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and now he's the chief medical advisor to the US President Joe Biden. His daily White House briefings made him a household name, not just in the United States, but across the world. He's been a voice of reason, of strength, and most importantly, of science throughout this COVID period. And tonight, Dr. Anthony Fauci joins CNN News 18 for a world-exclusive conversation.
India is going through a very terrible situation right now.
Dr. Anthony Fauci is the face of the anti-COVID fight in the United States. He's the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and now the chief medical advisor to US President Joe Biden. Thank you very much, Dr. Fauci, for taking time out and speaking to us here on CNN News 18. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. Let me start off by asking you, India is currently going through this second wave, which I'm sure you're also very closely following. Just in terms of the severity of what we are seeing with what ordinary people are going through, what do you make of it, and what stands out for you just in terms of the disease, the scale of it, and the severity of it?
Well, the thing that stands out, it has the dynamics, really somewhat similar to the extraordinarily large wave that we had in the United States at the end of the fall and the beginning of the winter, where we were seeing 300,000 cases per day, and we were up at around 3,000 and sometimes as high as close to 4,000 deaths per day. So there is that similarity there. As I mentioned when I was asked by several members of the India press what my recommendation would be and what I thought would be going on, I think it's clear that you have to take the step of shutting down most of the country, particularly the involved areas. And I don't mean shutting down for 6 months. You don't need to do that long. You just need to break the chain of transmission. And one can do that by shutting down to the extent possible for 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And then as soon as the cases start coming down and you vaccinate more people, then you could get ahead of the trajectory of the outbreak.
Okay.
Because obviously you've got to get as many people vaccinated as you possibly can.
True.
And when you do that, you've also got to do public health measures. The other thing that, at least from my viewpoint, looking at India from a distance, what we're seeing on TV and in the printed press is that there's a dire need for hospital beds, that people are actually not able to get a hospital bed. So the United States has responded both with oxygen cylinders as well as oxygen generators, as well as PPE, et cetera.
Okay.
That's good. So, obviously you don't want people to go without oxygen. You'd like to call on other of the developed countries of the world to similarly help out because, you know, in so many respects, India has helped out other countries
True.
when they've had difficulties. So I think as part of the solidarity with India, we really need to show that we are really very concerned. One of the things that I thought of that might be able to do is, you recall when the Chinese had their big surge over a year ago,
Yes.
they very, very rapidly put up hospitals, almost like field hospitals for the military.
Yes.
In the United States, our National Guard has been very helpful, for example, in the distribution of vaccines. So I was wondering whether or not, and this is just a thought, I don't tend to say that I know more about it than the Indian authorities because I don't. They are there. So I have to be modest enough to say, you guys know what you're doing. But I would think a suggestion, if you could mobilize the Indian military to help out and maybe put up field hospitals the way you would do, for example, during armed conflict,
Yes.
that could temporarily alleviate the shortage of hospital beds.
No, so there are a few of them that are there in the country right now, but I guess you're right. I mean, we will need field hospitals like we do during wartime to try and deal with this situation, simply because of the scale. But I want to come back to something that you said initially in your answer about, you know, shut down the country right now, not for an extended period of time, but certainly for 2 to 3 weeks to break the chain. Right now, we don't have a national lockdown. We have some individual states and individual provinces having a lockdown. And the reason perhaps why people are reluctant, certainly the federal government here is reluctant for a national lockdown, is because of the economic impact, the damaging economic impact it had last year. In this debate on whether to impose a lockdown, the benefits of it versus the negatives of it, you would err more on the side of shutting down the country just to break the chain for a few weeks, would you?
Yes, I think it's very clear from experiences that we've now had throughout the world in this terrible 16 months that we've gone through, that the economy is going to suffer badly if you don't control the outbreak. So when you try and balance preserving the economy versus keeping the outbreak going, the best thing to do is to shut down the outbreak. When you close for a few weeks, the economy will recover. The economy is going to recover without a doubt. Look at what's happened in the United States to the economy. It's recovering very nicely. So I would think that if you're talking about shutting down for a prolonged period of time, that's a different story.
Yes.
But if you're shutting down just long enough to break the chain of transmission, in the long run, it will be beneficial to the economy as opposed to detrimental to the economy.
So one of the things that we're noticing about this second wave, something that we didn't quite see in the first wave, is that a lot of younger people in their 30s, people in their early 40s, are getting infected, and some of them even fatally. And the other thing that we're noticing is that a lot more people are in requirement of oxygen. They're gasping for breath. Again, something that we did not see in the first wave. And I'm just curious whether you noticed these particular symptoms in the second wave that you saw in the United States between last fall and last winter.
Yeah, well, it appears that both if you look at India, what we're hearing, and again, I only can give you what I'm being reported to me. True. Is that there are two types of variants now in India, at least. One is the B117, which is the UK variant, which tends to be concentrating in New Delhi.
Yeah.
And then there's the 617, which tends to be more concentrating in the state of Maharashtra.
Yes.
Now, that being the case, both of those have an increased capability of transmitting better and more efficiently than the original Wuhan strain from over a year ago that spread throughout the world. So since it has a better capability of transmitting, you would expect to see all kinds of people, young and old, getting infected more. The fact that people seem to be requiring oxygen more frequently, it is entirely conceivable, and there are data that are suggesting this, that this virus may be a bit more virulent or a bit more dangerous in the sense of making people more seriously ill than the original virus.
Okay.
Both of those things could explain both younger people getting infected, because the more efficiency that a virus spreads, the more people are going to get infected. But also the requirement for oxygen very well may reflect the fact that it might be a bit more pathogenic.
Now, so India is vaccinating a lot of people. At last count, at least 170 million people had been vaccinated, at least with one dose of the vaccine. When it comes to both the doses, that's about 20 million or so, which in a country of this size, a billion plus, is a very minuscule number. In the US, though, and you've been doing this for a far longer time, you've managed to vaccinate over 200 million people, almost the entire adult population of the United States. And I was just curious if there were any lessons that India can learn in just the manner in which you expedited the vaccination process. You ensured that every arm has taken the jab.
Well, there are two parts of the vaccination program, and it may be that India right now is not in a position to have both of those going at the same time. One is to have an adequate supply of vaccine coming in at a rapid rate. As you probably know, the United States contracted with multiple companies, particularly the two major mRNA companies, as well as J&J. But most of the vaccine in the United States is the Moderna mRNA and the Pfizer BioNTech mRNA. So we contracted for a total of 600 million doses between both of those companies. And each month that went by, there was a very good flow or a cadence of vaccine coming in. That's the first thing. The second thing was when President Biden became president, he immediately instituted a very efficient way of implementing the delivery of vaccines into people's arms.
Okay.
We did community vaccine centers, federally qualified health centers, pharmacies, mobile units. We got vaccinators, volunteers who are physicians and nurses who came out of retirement to do it. We got our National Guard to help out. So it was a very, very aggressive, in a positive sense, effort to get the vaccine that we have into the arms of people. However, you can't do that unless you have a supply of vaccine.
Yes.
So it seems that what India has to do is do whatever they can by contractual relationships, by production within India. Because remember, prior to this, India was the largest vaccine producing country in the world.
That's correct.
So you've got to now take your own resources, make vaccine yourself. I know there's a supply shortage.
Yes.
But try and get as many supplies as possible to rev up your own capability, and then try and get it from other countries. There are multiple candidates out there. There's the British with the AZ, there's J&J, there's Moderna, there's Pfizer, there's Sputnik, there's a whole bunch of vaccines that you could use.
No, so you're absolutely right. I mean, the problem in India is on the supply side. We don't have enough vaccines coming through from the factories. So to that extent, I was just curious to know what you think of the decision that was taken yesterday by the US government to waive off patent rights for vaccines throughout the world, particularly the ones that are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Would you think that this would encourage multinational pharma giants, the makers of vaccines that you just mentioned a moment ago, would they be encouraged to come and start manufacturing locally in India? How do you see this move by the US trade representative to waive off patent rights for vaccines for the duration of dealing with COVID-19?
It will, but it won't be an immediate fix, because if companies transfer and don't get any patent restrictions, and are allowed to develop the technology to develop an mRNA vaccine, let's say in New Delhi and in Mumbai or wherever, the fact is that's going to take a while to get that up and running. So that's a good solution intermediately and in the long range, but it doesn't solve the problem that India has today and tomorrow and the next day. What you need now is vaccines to put into someone's arm. You will need in a year or in 6 months the capability of manufacturing by technology transfer, but that's going to take several months to a year to get running.
You mentioned some time back about the Indian variant, and we are seeing at least a bulk of the cases across the country, a large number, seem to be of the Indian variant, the B1617. And I'm just curious if you at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases or over at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, whether you've got a chance yet to study this Indian variant of the virus. Some people are calling it a double mutant, if you will. Would you be asking for the genome sequencing of this Indian variant?
You know, we are, and we would imagine literally as I'm speaking to you, within the next few days to a week, we'll be able to know what the capability of the currently used vaccines are to protect and to what degree they protect against 617. But today, we don't have that data, but literally imminently, within days to a week, we would know.
All right, that's good to know, and I'm sure your scientific insights will be of huge value and benefit to Indian scientists here and epidemiologists here who are studying this variant. So basically, to circle back, your advice right now to the Indian government, if they were to hire you, hypothetically speaking, your advice would be that the current wave, more than vaccines, to deal with the current wave, what we need is field hospitals, what we need is increasing bed capacity, making oxygen available. If the Indian government were to requisition your services, what would your prescription be to the government if they were to lean on you and ask you for your advice on how to deal with this current wave?
No, it would be just that. I think you have to look at it as an immediate, an intermediate, and a longer range. Right now, immediate, you have people dying, you have people needing hospitalization. You've got to get them oxygen, drugs, personal protective equipment, a variety of things to help them, literally save their lives. You've got to get hospital beds now. You can't have people out in the street in taxi cabs getting oxygen the way we see on the international TV media.
Yeah.
You've got to correct that problem right now. Then there's the intermediate. How do we get more vaccines so that we can get people 3 weeks, a month from now to prevent them from getting sick? And that means you got to get vaccine that's already produced. Then in the longer range, you've got to be able to get the transfer of the right vaccine technology so that over the next 6 months to a year, you can prevent subsequent waves from coming in. So I look at it as 3 phases. Today, a few weeks to a month from now, and many months to a year from now.
So since you mentioned subsequent waves, and there's been a fear over the last couple of days here, one of the chief government advisors talked about getting ready for a third wave, even as we are being consumed right in the middle of this second wave. Is there a fear of a third or a fourth wave? Because it seems like, certainly in India's case, the second wave seems far more intense than the first one was. And it seems like the newer the wave, the more intense the ability of the disease to spread and also its ability to cause longer term damage. So is there a fear of a third, maybe even a fourth wave because of COVID-19?
Well, what we are experiencing with the variants that we know about, the 351, the variants that are United States variants, the 526 in New York, the 427 in California, we're experiencing that when you get a good vaccine, like the ones we're vaccinating, and you get a high titer of neutralizing antibodies, not only do you protect against the original virus, but there's a spillover effect, not 100%, but enough to protect people from getting serious disease from the variants. So what I believe will happen is that if India now gets as many people as they possibly can with their large population of 1.4 billion people, if you can vaccinate as many people as you possibly can now, even when we get new variants, the vaccination that you do now will very likely cushion or buffer the effect of a new variant. It may come, but I don't think you're going to get a very serious disease if you get almost everybody vaccinated. Because even though the vaccine may not be specific against the variant, it will have some effect against the variant.
In this phase, like you rightly said, what we need today is to deal with the current wave, and for which we need drugs. We need medicines that are able to fight this disease. And I want a quick question on these drugs, because there's a lot of confusion here in India. A lot of doctors prescribing remdesivir. I know it's not a magic bullet of sorts, but remdesivir, a very expensive injection, is being prescribed in very serious cases. There's also steroids like dexamethasone. What would your advice be? And like I said, there is no standard prescription for this, but what would your general advice be for when does one take dexamethasone and when does one take remdesivir?
Oh, I mean, right now you want specific drugs against the virus to be given very early on when people get symptoms to prevent them from going to the hospital. Once they're in the hospital and require mechanical ventilation or high flow oxygen, that's a different type of a pathogenesis. You've got to suppress the inflammation and the aberrant immune response. That's the reason why dexamethasone works so well. And dexamethasone and baricitinib and other things that suppress inflammation. So you have to have two poles of the treatment, one early on to prevent people from going to the hospital, and then once they're there and they get seriously ill, you've got to suppress that aberrant inflammation.
All right. And finally, Dr. Fauci, you led an entire nation through much of last year, a very turbulent time through COVID for the United States. Your daily briefings were a source of hope for many millions, like I said at the top of the show, not just in the US, but also across the world. Personally, for you, for Anthony Fauci, what has been your biggest learning in a way that you would like to share that with viewers here in India who are watching you right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can learn from the difficulties that other countries have had. In the United States, when we went through the very difficult time, and we're still not out of it completely, one of the things you've got to do is pull together as a united nation. You can't have divisiveness among you. The common enemy is the virus. So you've got to put aside all political disagreements, all ideological differences, and focus on one thing, like a laser beam. The enemy is the virus. You've got to fight the virus together, particularly when you have a big, diverse country like the United States and a big, diverse country like India. You've got to put all of your resources and focus just on the virus. That's the lesson that I've learned.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Anthony Fauci, for your advice, your inspiring words, and hopefully, just like the United States has gotten out of the woods and you ably led them, we too will get out of the woods in a few weeks. Thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. All right, and finally, as we wrap up, it's a major victory, not just for India, but for other developing countries as well. South Africa has been joining us in this fight. The US government has now said that it's going to support the waiver of intellectual property protection on COVID-19 vaccines to try and help the pandemic. CNN's Britt Conway has more.
For more than a year now, the world has been fighting COVID-19. In some parts of the world, we've really improved.
I'm going to come back next week as well.
In other parts of the world, the virus is spreading rapidly.
The World Health Organization says there have been more global cases in the last 2 weeks than the first 6 months of the pandemic. And yet, leaders from the WHO remain hopeful.
We really have a shot at controlling COVID.
But part of that means shots in arms. Easier said than done, depending on the country where you live. Now, the U.S. says it will support a petition easing patent rules on COVID-19 vaccines.
What India and South Africa have asked for is a temporary waiver to address the pandemic.
There's been pushback from U.S. drug makers and pleas to push ahead from global advocacy groups. One official says the White House met with more than 24 stakeholders before making its decision.
It was a statement that put people over patents. It was about leading in the world and helping producing what the world needed at a time of unprecedented crisis.
It's not a done deal, though. Members of the World Trade Organization have to unanimously agree, and that could take months. But health experts say it's a step in the right direction.
If we help work and collaborate with countries around the world, I do believe we will turn this pandemic around.
No one is safe until everyone is safe.
The end game is the equitable distribution of vaccines.